Zira moved carefully through the glowing blue forest, her silver eyes scanning the strange plants around her. The air smelled sweet, filled with the scent of flowers that only bloomed under the twin moons. She knew she wasn't supposed to be here. The elders had warned her many times. No one was allowed near the forbidden forest. But Zira was curious. She always had been. Tonight, the air felt different. The trees whispered softly as if warning her to go back. The ground beneath her feet was warm, pulsing with energy. She stepped over a thick vine and gasped as she saw something she had never seen before. A single red flower stood in the middle of the clearing, its petals glowing like fire. It was beautiful, unlike anything else in the forest. Zira felt drawn to it. As she stepped closer, she noticed something hovering above the flower. A strange bee, golden and shining, its wings moving so fast, they looked like a blur. It wasn't like the bees she had seen before. It was bigger, and its body seemed to glow softly. Zira had never seen anything like it. She crouched down, watching it carefully. The bee moved slowly, almost as if it could sense her presence. For a moment, everything was silent. The world around her seemed to pause. Then, without warning, the bee shot forward. Zira barely had time to react before she felt a sharp pain on her leg. She gasped, stumbling backward. The sting burned, hotter than fire, spreading quickly through her veins. Her heart pounded as she clutched her leg, her vision blurring. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy. The ground beneath her tilted, and she fell to her knees. A strange buzzing sound filled her ears, growing louder and louder. She looked down at her leg and felt her stomach twist. The sting mark was glowing, a faint golden light spreading from the wound. Her breathing became unsteady. Something was wrong. Panic rose inside her. She had to get back to the village. She had to find help. But when she tried to stand, her legs refused to move. A strange warmth spread through her body, making her feel light and weightless. The trees around her seemed to blur together, the world spinning. She felt her heartbeat slow, each thump echoing in her ears. Her fingers tingled, her skin buzzing as if tiny sparks were dancing across it. She struggled to keep her eyes open, but the darkness was pulling her in. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the golden bee, still hovering above the red flower, its wings moving softly as if watching her. Zira didn't know how long she was unconscious. When she finally woke up, the world felt different. The air was colder, the forest quieter. She blinked, her vision still hazy. Slowly, she pushed herself up, her body aching. The sting on her leg was no longer burning, but something was strange. She could still feel it, a faint energy pulsing under her skin. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The forest looked the same, but she didn't feel the same. Her hands were shaking as she touched the sting mark. It was still glowing, but dimmer now. She swallowed hard, fear creeping into her chest. What had that bee done to her? She needed to get back home. She turned, forcing her legs to move. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground was pulling her down. Her body felt different, stronger, but also unfamiliar. Her senses felt sharper. She could hear the soft rustling of leaves far away, the distant sound of water dripping from a tree branch. Even the air smelled stronger, every scent more vivid than before. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had changed. The buzzing in her ears hadn't completely stopped. It was still there, faint but constant, like a whisper she couldn't understand. Her fingers twitched, the tingling sensation never fully fading. When she finally reached the edge of the village, she hesitated. The warm lights from the houses flickered in the distance, the familiar voices of her people echoing through the night. She had never felt so relieved to be home. But at the same time, something held her back. She looked down at her hands. They looked the same, but she knew they weren't. Something inside her had shifted. She could feel it. The question was, what was she becoming? "You said." Zira took a deep breath and stepped into the village. The warm glow of lanterns lit the narrow paths between the small stone houses. The familiar smell of roasted fruits and herbs filled the air, but something felt different. Or maybe it was just her. She moved carefully, her legs feeling heavier than before. The sting on her leg still pulsed, a dull warmth spreading under her skin. She pulled her robe lower, hiding the strange glow. She didn't want anyone to see. Not yet. As she reached her home, she paused. The wooden door was slightly open. Inside, she could hear the soft voices of her parents. They were probably worried. She had been gone longer than usual. Taking another deep breath, she stepped inside. Her mother looked up first. "Zyra, where have you been?" Her voice was full of relief, but there was worry in her eyes. Her father turned from the small fire, his face tense. Zyra forced a smile. "Just exploring." Her mother sighed and shook her head. "You know the rules. The forest is dangerous at night." "I know," Zyra said quickly. "I'm sorry." Her father studied her closely. "You look pale. Are you feeling well?" Zyra hesitated. She wanted to tell them what happened, but something inside her stopped her. How could she explain it? That a glowing bee had stung her, and now her body felt strange. They would never believe her. "I'm fine," she said, forcing herself to sound normal. "Just tired." Her mother softened and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." Zyra nodded and walked to her small sleeping space. As soon as she lay down, she felt her body tense. The buzzing in her ears was louder now. She clenched her fists, trying to ignore it. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Her body felt restless, her skin tingling. The sting on her leg burned slightly, and for a moment, she thought she could feel something moving beneath her skin. Hours passed, and Zyra remained awake, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. She needed answers. Just before dawn, she made up her mind. She would go back to the forest. She had to find that bee again. It was the only way to understand what was happening to her. Quietly, she slipped out of bed and stepped outside. The village was still asleep, the air cold against her skin. She wrapped her cloak tighter around herself and moved quickly toward the trees. As she entered the forest, the strange feeling inside her grew stronger. The buzzing in her ears was no longer just a sound. It was something else, something deeper. It was calling her. She walked through the tall, glowing trees, retracing her steps from the night before. The ground felt different beneath her feet, almost as if it recognized her. She reached the clearing, and her heart pounded as she saw the red flower again. It was still there, glowing softly. But the golden bee was gone. Zyra's chest tightened. Had she been too late? She stepped closer, reaching out to touch the flower. Then she heard it, a soft humming sound, almost like a whisper. She spun around. In the shadows, something moved. A figure stepped forward. It wasn't a bee. It was someone. And they were waiting for her. Zyra froze, her breath caught in her throat. The figure stepped closer, emerging from the shadows of the glowing trees. The air around them shimmered, like heat rising from the ground. Zyra's heart pounded. She could barely make out the shape. Tall, slender, moving with an unnatural smoothness. Then the figure spoke. "You returned." The voice was soft but strange, layered with an echo as if two voices spoke at once. A chill ran down Zyra's spine. She wanted to run, but her legs felt rooted to the ground. "Who are you?" she asked, forcing herself to stay calm. The figure moved closer, stepping fully into the moonlight. Zyra gasped. It was a woman. At least she looked like one. Her skin was golden, glowing faintly, just like the bee from before. Her eyes were sharp and bright, swirling with colors that shifted like liquid. She wore a flowing cloak, made of something that shimmered like living metal, and behind her, wings, not like a bird's, but thin, translucent, glowing wings, pulsing with faint energy. Zyra took a step back. "What are you?" The woman tilted her head slightly, studying her. I am what you will become. Zura's blood ran cold. The woman's gaze dropped to Zura's leg. The sting has marked you. You feel it, don't you? Zura swallowed hard. Feel what? The woman took another step forward. Zura wanted to back away, but something in the air held her still. The change, the woman said softly. It has already begun. Zura's heart pounded against her ribs. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want any of this. I don't understand, she whispered. The woman's glowing eyes locked onto hers. You will. Zura's skin tingled. The buzzing in her ears grew louder. Her body felt warm, like something inside her was waking up. Then, pain. A sudden jolt shot through her leg, up her spine, into her head. She gasped and stumbled forward, her knees hitting the soft ground. Her vision blurred as waves of heat pulsed through her veins. The woman didn't move to help her. She only watched. Zura clutched the earth, her fingers digging into the soil. Her breath came in sharp, shaky gasps. Her whole body felt wrong. What's happening to me? She gasped. The woman knelt beside her. Your body is responding to the sting. Your mind is awakening to what you truly are. Zura's hands trembled. I'm not. She stopped. Her voice sounded strange. Was it just her, or did she hear something else beneath her own words? A faint, low vibration, like an echo. She gritted her teeth, trying to push away the rising panic. Make it stop, she begged. The woman shook her head. You cannot stop it. You can only embrace it. Zura shut her eyes. She didn't want this. She just wanted to go home, to be normal. But deep inside, she knew she wasn't normal anymore. Something inside her had changed, and it was only getting stronger. Zura struggled to breathe as the strange energy inside her pulsed, growing stronger with every passing second. Her skin felt hot, almost alive, as if something was moving beneath it. The buzzing in her ears was no longer just a sound. It was a feeling, a vibration that seemed to come from deep within her body. The golden woman remained still, watching her carefully. Her glowing eyes held no fear, only patience. Zura clenched her fists. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make this stop. But deep inside, she knew the truth. This change wasn't something she could control. It was happening whether she wanted it or not. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to stand. Her legs felt unsteady, but stronger at the same time. Her muscles ached, but there was also a strange lightness in her body, as if she was no longer completely bound to the ground. She looked down at her hands. Her fingertips shimmered faintly, just like the woman's golden skin. Zura swallowed hard. What am I becoming? The woman's gaze softened. You are evolving. Zura shook her head. No, I'm just. She stopped. The buzzing in her head had changed. It was no longer random noise. It was whispers. She turned sharply, looking around the forest. There was no one else there. Only the trees, the glowing plants, the night air. Yet the whispers grew louder, filling her mind. She could almost understand them. Words half-formed, slipping away before she could grasp them. Zura pressed her hands to her temples. I can hear something. The woman nodded. The hive is speaking to you. Zura's breath caught. The hive. The ones who came before you. The ones who have been waiting. Zura's chest tightened. She didn't understand. None of this made sense. She had only been stung by a bee, a simple insect. How could that change her into something else? She took a step back. No, this isn't real. I'm not like you. The woman stepped forward, her wings shifting slightly behind her. You were chosen, Zura. The sting was not an accident. The hive saw you. They marked you. Zura shook her head violently. I don't want this. The moment she spoke, something in the air changed. The buzzing around her grew louder, turning into a deep hum. The trees seemed to sway, as if responding to an unseen force. The woman's eyes darkened. You do not have a choice. Zira felt a sharp pain in her back, a pulling sensation that made her gasp. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground, gripping the dirt as a wave of heat rushed through her spine. She could feel it now. Something inside her was waking up. Her breathing became ragged. She reached back, her fingers brushing her shoulders. Her heart nearly stopped. Something was there. Something was growing. Zira's hands trembled as she touched the soft, delicate structures emerging from her back. They were thin, almost invisible, but they pulsed with energy. She bit back a scream. Wings. She had wings. Terror shot through her. She didn't understand this. She didn't want this. She turned to the woman, her voice barely above a whisper. "What have you done to me?" The woman's expression didn't change. "You are becoming what you were always meant to be." Zira's pulse pounded in her ears. She didn't know if she could believe that. All she knew was that she was no longer just herself, and there was no turning back. "You said." Zira's chest rose and fell in shaky breaths. The weight on her back was unfamiliar, unnatural, and yet, deep inside, she could feel that it belonged to her now. She wasn't sure how or why, but the thin, pulsing wings attached to her spine were a part of her. She ran her hands over them, feeling their strange, soft texture. They weren't like the woman's shimmering golden wings, but they were growing, changing, just like her. Panic clawed at her mind. She had to stop this. She had to fight it. She couldn't let herself turn into something else. She forced herself to stand, her legs still trembling from the overwhelming heat in her body. The golden-skinned woman stood quietly, watching her, as if waiting for something. Zira gritted her teeth. "Make it stop," she demanded. The woman shook her head. "It cannot be stopped." Zira clenched her fists. "I don't want this." The buzzing in her ears grew louder, the whispers swirling through her mind. Growing stronger, faster, more urgent. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block them out. But they weren't just sounds. They were voices. And they were calling her. She gasped and stumbled backward. "No, no, this isn't real." The woman took a slow step forward. "You feel them, don't you?" Zira shook her head, her breath ragged. "I'm not like them. I'm not like you." The woman didn't argue. She only watched, waiting. Then Zira felt something shift. A deep, instinctive pull in her chest, as if something inside her was reaching outward. She turned her gaze to the trees, to the dark spaces between the glowing leaves. For a split second, she thought she saw them. Eyes. Watching. Waiting. The whispers in her head surged, growing louder, faster. She clutched her temples, squeezing her eyes shut. "Get out of my head," she shouted. But the moment she did, the entire forest seemed to respond. A low hum vibrated through the ground beneath her feet, sending ripples through the air. The glowing plants flickered, pulsing in unison. The trees swayed as if something unseen was moving through them. Zira's pulse pounded. This wasn't just inside her head. Something was here. And it was coming for her. Her body tensed as a new feeling surged through her. Something deeper than fear, something primal. She could feel the presence surrounding her, pressing into her mind, urging her to listen. She turned to the golden-skinned woman. "What's happening?" The woman's glowing eyes met hers. "The hive has awakened." A cold chill ran down Zira's spine. Then, from the darkness of the forest, they appeared. Figures, dozens of them, emerging from the shadows, stepping into the moonlight. Their skin shimmered with the same golden glow as the woman's. Their eyes flickered like liquid fire. And behind each of them, thin, transparent wings pulsed with a quiet, steady hum. Zira's breath caught. They all looked different, some tall, some small, some with markings on their skin that shimmered like living gold. But their eyes were all the same. And they were staring at her. She took a step back. This can't be happening. The whispers in her head merged into a single unified voice. Soft, calm, welcoming. Join us. Zyra's heart pounded. She turned to the golden woman, her voice barely above a whisper. What are they? The woman's expression remained unreadable. They are your kind. Zyra's stomach twisted. No, she whispered. I'm not one of you. The golden woman's gaze didn't waver. Then why can you hear them? Zyra's whole body went cold. She had been hearing them. She could feel their presence, their connection to her, as if an invisible thread linked her mind to theirs. And worst of all, deep inside, past the fear and panic, a part of her wanted to answer their call. The figures stepped closer. The hum in the air grew louder. Zyra's fingers trembled as she reached up, touching the base of her growing wings. Was she really still herself, or was she already turning into something else? You said. Zyra's breath came in quick, shallow gasps. The figures surrounded her now, their golden eyes glowing softly in the dim light. The hum in the air had settled into a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat pulsing through the trees, the ground, her own body. She clenched her fists, fighting the urge to listen, to give in to the whispers that called her name. Join us. You are one of us. The words weren't spoken aloud, but she felt them inside her head, pressing against her thoughts like a soft, insistent wave. The golden woman stepped closer. You feel it, don't you? She said, her voice calm, almost gentle. Zyra swallowed hard. I don't want to feel it. The woman tilted her head. But you do. Zyra shook her head. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be. She had lived in her village her entire life. She was normal, human. But humans didn't grow wings. They didn't hear voices inside their heads. They didn't feel connected to something unseen. She took a shaky step back, her hands clutching her arms, trying to ground herself in something. Anything. Familiar, but even her own skin felt different now. Warmer, alive with an energy that wasn't there before. I don't belong here, she whispered. The woman watched her closely. Then why does the hive call to you? Zyra squeezed her eyes shut. I don't know, she snapped. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know why I feel like this. I don't. Her voice caught in her throat as another wave of heat surged through her body. She stumbled forward, knees hitting the soft ground. Her wings twitched behind her, and this time she felt them stretch on their own. It was an unnatural sensation, like moving a limb she had never had before, yet somehow instinctively knowing how to use it. The buzzing in her head grew louder. Zyra gasped as a new voice joined the whispers. It was deeper, older, filled with something ancient and powerful. It spoke not in words, but in understanding. A presence, vast and endless, brushed against her mind. Welcome. Zyra's whole body stiffened. The warmth spread from her back, through her veins, into her chest, her arms, her fingers. She felt open, exposed, as if something was reaching inside her, unlocking pieces of her she didn't even know existed. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to fight against it. No, she whispered. The golden woman knelt beside her. You are afraid. Zyra turned her head, her vision blurred. Wouldn't you be? The woman's glowing gaze softened. I was. Once. Zyra's chest tightened. Then how do I stop it? A long pause. Then the woman shook her head. You don't. Zyra's heart pounded. Before she could respond, a sudden shift in the air made the glowing figures around her straighten. Their wings twitched in unison, the hum in the air deepening into something almost resonant, as if the entire forest had taken a breath. Zyra felt it too. A pull. A summoning. The golden woman stood and turned toward the trees. It's time. Zyra pushed herself up, her legs still shaky. Time for what? The woman didn't answer. The figures around her moved, stepping aside to reveal something beyond the trees. A massive hive. It rose into the sky like a living structure, its walls pulsing with faint golden light. It was unlike anything Zyra had ever seen, part organic, part crystalline, as if it had grown from the very fabric of the world itself. And deep within its glowing heart, something was waiting. Zira's breath caught. Whatever was inside, it wanted her. She took a step back. No. The golden woman turned to face her. You must go. Zira's pulse pounded. I'm not going anywhere. The woman's expression didn't change. You don't have a choice. Zira's wings twitched, unbidden. The whispers surged in her mind, a wave of voices pulling her forward. Her body moved on its own. She gasped, trying to resist, but her feet carried her forward, toward the hive, toward the unknown. And in the depths of her mind, a terrifying thought formed. What if this was who she was always meant to be? You said. Zira struggled, every muscle in her body resisting the invisible force pulling her toward the hive. But it was useless. Her legs moved forward, step by step, like a puppet on unseen strings. Her wings twitched with every pulse of the humming energy surrounding her. The golden-eyed figures stood still, watching in silence as she walked past them. Their faces held no emotion, no cruelty, no kindness, just acceptance. The whispers in her mind grew louder. You are almost home. Her chest tightened. No, this isn't home. This isn't me. She clenched her fists, trying to fight, to hold on to whatever was left of herself before this change swallowed her whole. But the hive loomed ahead, its glowing walls pulsing like a living heartbeat. The closer she got, the stronger the energy became, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. Her vision blurred. Memories of her village, of her old life, flashed before her eyes. Her mother's voice, her father's laughter, the cool wind by the river where she used to sit for hours. Would she even remember them after this? A sharp pain shot through her back. Zira gasped as her wings stretched wider, their translucent glow becoming stronger. She felt them fully now, as if they had always been there, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Panic clawed at her chest. No, this isn't real. This isn't real. She was almost at the entrance. The hive's walls shimmered, and suddenly they opened. A deep golden light poured out, casting long shadows over the trees. The air became thick with a strange, sweet scent, something familiar, something that made her dizzy. And then she saw it. At the heart of the hive, resting in a swirling cocoon of golden energy, was a figure. Tall, elegant. Its body was like liquid gold, its wings vast and shimmering. Its eyes were the same as hers now. The whispers in her head stopped. Silence. Then a single voice spoke, clear, direct, and more powerful than all the others combined. Welcome back, daughter of the hive. Zira's heart stopped. Daughter of the hive. No, she whispered. I don't belong here. The figure tilted its head. Its golden eyes studied her, not with cruelty, not with force, but with something far more terrifying. Recognition. You were never meant to stay in the world of humans. You were meant to return to us. Zira's body shook. Everything inside her screamed to run, to escape, to break free from whatever this was before it consumed her completely. But her wings twitched again, not in resistance, but in response. Something deep inside her knew this place, as if she had always belonged to it, as if she had only been waiting to return. Tears burned in her eyes. I don't understand, she whispered. The golden figure stepped forward. You will. The walls of the hive closed behind her.